I'm posting this from a throwaway because that feels like the least I can do, even now. It's December again. Lights on balconies, fake snow in store windows, that same tinny version of Silent Night playing everywhere. People talk about Christmas like it's a reset button. For me, it's a reminder. I'm not a murderer. I need to say that up front because words matter, even if they don't save you. But I was involved in a disappearance, one that still comes up when people from my hometown get drunk enough or brave enough to talk about it. A person vanished, and I helped make sure no one knew where to look. This happened years ago, back when I was convinced I was smarter than consequences and desperate enough to justify anything. The motive wasn't money, at least not directly. It was fear. Fear of exposure, of losing the fragile life I'd stitched together, of someone else's truth colliding with mine at the worst possible time. Christmas just happened to be the backdrop, which feels cruel in hindsight, like committing a sin under a spotlight of tinsel and goodwill. I'm not here for forgiveness. I don't think Reddit can hand that out anyway. I'm writing because I've told this story to myself so many times that it's starting to rot inside my head. Maybe laying it out in pieces will finally make it real. Or maybe it's just another way to avoid silence. Either way, this is what happened, or at least the part one can admit to. The person who disappeared, I'll call him Evan, wasn't a stranger. That's the part people always assume wrong. They picture some shadowy figure, a bad crowd, a random act. Evan was someone I knew well enough to hate myself for knowing. We worked together briefly, overlapped in the same social circles, shared enough late-night conversations that he knew things about me I'd spent years burying. I was already on edge back then. My life looked stable on the surface: steady job, decent apartment, a girlfriend who believed in the version of me I showed her. But underneath that was a secret so brittle that even a light tap could shatter it. Evan had started hinting. Little comments at first. Jokes that landed too close to the truth. A look that lingered just long enough to let me know he was thinking about leverage. I told myself he was bluffing. I told myself I could talk my way out of it. But then came the message, sent 2 weeks before Christmas, asking to meet. To clear the air. Those exact words. I still see them when my phone lights up at night. I could have said no. That's the part that keeps me awake. I could have blocked him, confessed first, burned my own life down in a controlled way. Instead, I agreed to meet him. I chose the path where I stayed intact, no matter the cost to someone else. I didn't know yet how far that choice would go, but the seed was already there. And once it's planted, it grows whether you water it or not. I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to ruin someone's life today. That's not how it felt. It felt like logistics. Risk management. Like solving a problem before it solved me. After Evan messaged me, I started thinking in branches. If this happens, then I do this. I scoped out where we'd meet, suggested a spot that felt casual but isolated enough to talk without interruptions. An old bar near the river that went heavy on Christmas decor and light on customers that time of year. I knew the bartender. That mattered more than it should have. I rehearsed conversations in my head like I was studying for an exam. What to say if he demanded money? What to say if he threatened to tell my girlfriend? What to say if he already had? I told myself the goal was simple: make him back off. Buy time. Get him to disappear from my immediate orbit. The worst part is how normal everything felt while I was preparing. I wrapped gifts. I went to work. I laughed at a stupid Secret Santa mug someone gave me. All the while, I was quietly arranging details, rides, alibis, excuses, telling myself it was just in case. Just being careful. Looking back, that's where the line really was. Not at the meeting. Not at what happened after. It was the moment I started planning for outcomes that required Evan to stop being a problem permanently. I didn't call it that then. I called it being prepared. The night we met was cold in that sharp, biting way December does best. The kind of cold that makes everything feel brittle, like it could snap if handled wrong. The bar was dressed up for Christmas, garlands behind the counter, cheap ornaments taped to the windows, a plastic tree blinking in the corner like it was nervous. Evan showed up late. Of course he did. I remember checking my phone too many times, half hoping he wouldn't come at all so I could tell myself I'd overreacted. When he finally walked in, he looked relaxed. That scared me more than anger would have. He ordered a drink like this was just another Thursday. We talked at first about nothing. Work. Old co-workers. How weird it was that life kept moving. Every sentence felt like filler, like we were both circling something sharp in the middle of the table. I noticed little things I shouldn't have been paying attention to, how his hands shook slightly when he lifted the glass, how he kept glancing toward the door. When he finally leaned in and lowered his voice, I felt my chest tighten. He didn't threaten me outright. He didn't have to. He just confirmed what I already knew. He remembered everything, and he was tired of carrying it alone. He wanted help. That word did a lot of work in that conversation. That's when I realized this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a negotiation. And I was already losing ground. The music got louder, the bar got warmer, and something in my head went very quiet, like a switch flipping. I agreed to step outside with him to talk privately. I told myself it was still under control. I was wrong. Outside, the air hit us like a slap. The river was a black ribbon behind the bar, moving slow and quiet, barely reflecting the Christmas lights strung along the railing. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt staged, like a set waiting for something bad to happen. Evan lit a cigarette with shaking hands. He started talking faster out there, like the cold loosened something in him. He said he wasn't trying to ruin me. That he just wanted things to be fair. That word again, fair, as if there was a scale somewhere that could balance what he knew against what I had to lose. I remember nodding along, saying the right things, buying time. I told him I needed a few days. Told him we'd figure something out after the holidays. Inside, my brain was sprinting. Every scenario I'd rehearsed indoors felt useless now. He wasn't bluffing. Worse, he was scared. Desperate people don't stick to deals. That's when he mentioned leaving town. Just for a while, he said. Clearing his head. Seeing family? It sounded casual, but it landed heavy. If he left, I'd have no control over who he talked to or when. The thought made my stomach twist. I suggested we walk down toward the river, away from the noise. To think. I framed it like concern. Like I was helping him calm down. He hesitated, then followed. That hesitation matters. I think about it a lot. Every step away from the bar felt like stepping out of my own life and into someone else's bad decision. I could still have stopped. Turned back. Let the consequences hit me full force. Instead, I kept walking, telling myself this was still just a conversation, even as the night closed in around us. The path by the river was mostly empty, just a dusting of old snow and patches of ice that hadn't melted all winter. Our footsteps sounded too loud. Evan kept talking, circling the same points, like repetition could make his situation safer. I barely heard him. I was watching the water, the way it moved without caring about us at all. Then something small went wrong. He slipped. Not dramatically. Just enough to stumble and grab my arm to steady himself. That tiny, human reflex snapped whatever illusion I still had that this was calm or manageable. My heart jumped straight into my throat. He laughed it off, apologized, but I didn't let go right away. I don't know why. Fear, maybe? Or instinct. Or the awful clarity that if he walked away now, I'd never get my life back. We argued. Quietly at first, then sharper. He accused me of planning something. I accused him of cornering me. Words piled up, overlapping, either of us listening. A couple walked past us further down the path, laughing, and we both fell silent until they were gone. That silence was heavy. Loaded. When Evan turned back toward the bar, something in me panicked. I told him to wait. I said I needed him to understand how serious this was. I reached for him again, Not hard, not violent, but he pulled away, and in that motion, everything tipped. He lost his footing for real this time. There was a scramble, a rush of adrenaline, the sickening realization that I couldn't fully remember where my hands were or how much force I'd used. He went down hard, out of sight for a second, and when I reached the edge, all I could hear was the river. I stood there longer than I want to admit, staring into the dark, telling myself he'd stand up, yell, swear, come back into view. He didn't. And in that moment, I understood the difference between not being a killer and still being responsible. The first thing I did was nothing. I stood there, frozen, listening to the river like it might explain what to do next. I whispered his name once, quiet, pathetic, then louder. No answer. Just water moving on like it always does. My phone was in my pocket. I remember feeling it there, heavy as a brick. Every reasonable option ran through my head in rapid succession: call emergency services, run back to the bar, scream until someone helped. Each one ended the same way in my mind, with questions I couldn't answer and a life I couldn't keep. I told myself he'd swum to shore somewhere downstream. That people survive falls all the time. That calling it in would only make things worse if it turned out to be nothing. These thoughts stacked up fast, forming a wall between me and the obvious truth: I was choosing myself. I wiped my hands on my coat like they were dirty, even though I couldn't see anything on them. I paced. I checked the path for anyone coming. The Christmas lights along the railing flickered, cheerful and obscene. Somewhere behind me, the bar door opened and closed, laughter spilling out and then disappearing again. Eventually, I walked away. I didn't run. That's another detail that haunts me. I walked back to the bar, sat at the counter, and ordered another drink with hands that shook so badly the bartender asked if I was okay. I told him it was just the cold. I stayed long enough to be seen, long enough to become part of the background again. When I finally left, I took the long way home. I kept expecting to hear sirens. I didn't. That silence felt like permission, and I hate myself for how quickly I accepted it. I barely slept. When I did, it was shallow and frantic, the kind where your body rests, but your brain keeps pacing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the edge of the path, felt the cold air in my lungs. I woke up before dawn and immediately checked my phone, like it might have news waiting for me. Nothing. The city looked wrong in the morning. Too normal. Snow dusted the sidewalks overnight, clean and forgiving, like it was trying to erase something. I made coffee I didn't drink. I turned the TV on for noise and didn't absorb a single word. I kept listening for sirens, helicopters, anything that would confirm the world had noticed. By noon, I convinced myself of a version of events that let me breathe. Evan had climbed out somewhere. He was embarrassed, angry, maybe even laughing at how shaken I'd been. He'd disappear on his own terms, and this would all fade into a bad memory I could compartmentalize. Then my phone rang. It wasn't the police. It was a mutual acquaintance asking if I'd seen Evan. He hadn't shown up to work. His phone was going straight to voicemail. I said no, kept my voice steady, even added a casual, "Let me know if you hear anything." Hanging up felt like stealing something I didn't deserve, time, maybe, or mercy. That evening, the first post went up online. A photo of Evan smiling, taken in better days, framed by Christmas emojis and concern. Missing. The words sat heavy on my chest. Not dead. Not gone. Missing, like he might still come back if we just waited long enough. I waited. And with every hour that passed, I understood that whatever line I thought I hadn't crossed didn't matter anymore. The world had shifted, and I was standing on the wrong side of it. The search started small and then ballooned, like these things always do. Flyers on poles. A candlelight vigil by the river, that river, where people said his name out loud like it might echo back. I stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in my pockets, nodding along as if I belonged there. Maybe that was the worst part. I did belong there. I just didn't deserve to. People asked questions in the careful way they do when they don't want to accuse but can't stop wondering. When was the last time you saw him? Did he seem off? Was he talking about leaving town? I answered honestly where I could and selectively where I couldn't. The truth is flexible when you're terrified. Someone mentioned seeing us together at the bar that night. My stomach dropped, but I laughed it off, said we talked for a bit and he'd left early. It wasn't even a full lie. That's how these things work. You build the story out of fragments of reality so it doesn't collapse under its own weight. My girlfriend noticed the change in me before anyone else. She said I was distant, jumpy, like I was bracing for impact all the time. I blamed work. The holidays. Stress. She believed me because she loved me, and I let that belief shield me like armor. Every knock on the door made my pulse spike. Every unknown number felt like the end. And yet days passed. Then weeks. The river was searched. Nothing definitive came up. The word missing stayed missing, too, never replaced with anything final. That uncertainty became my sentence. I wasn't arrested. I wasn't cleared. I was just there, living inside a question mark. And the worst realization settled in quietly. As long as no one knew, I could keep going. I hated myself for how relieving that felt. Time didn't heal anything, but it did dull the edges enough for me to function. That scared me more than the panic ever did. I learned routines like coping mechanisms, what to say when Evan's name came up, how long to pause before answering so it sounded thoughtful, not rehearsed. I practiced looking sad in the mirror and hated how convincing it got. The police talked to me once. Just once. It was informal, they said. Standard procedure. We sat at a small table with bad coffee and a calendar still turned to December. I told them about the bar, the brief conversation, how he'd stepped out ahead of me. I even mentioned the river, casually, like an afterthought. They nodded, wrote things down, thanked me for my time. I floated for days after that. Not relief, something worse. Confidence. The kind that whispers you got away with it even when you don't want to hear it. I doubled down on being normal. I showed up to work early. I hosted a small Christmas dinner. I laughed at jokes I didn't hear. At night, though, I'd replay everything, searching for cracks. Did anyone see us walk down the path together? Had I left footprints I didn't notice? Was there a camera somewhere I'd missed? I googled things I shouldn't have, learned more than I wanted about rivers and cold and time. Eventually, people stopped asking me questions. The flyers faded. The vigil candles burned out. Evan became a sad story people referenced in the past tense without realizing it. Life closed ranks around me, and I let it. Because admitting the truth then would have meant admitting that all this fragile normalcy, was built on a choice I made and kept making every day after. The next Christmas was worse than the first. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by something heavier, memory with nowhere to go. Decorations went up like nothing had happened. Same lights. Same songs. Different me. At a family gathering, someone mentioned Evan. Not by name at first, just, "That guy who went missing by the river a while back." They shook their head, said it was tragic, said they hoped the family got answers someday. I felt my face burn and focused hard on my plate like the mashed potatoes required my full attention. I started noticing how often people disappear in small ways. Friendships fade. Coworkers quit without goodbye. Cities absorb people and never give them back. Evan's absence blended into that background noise, and that terrified me. It meant the world didn't need an explanation as badly as I'd thought. At night, I'd drive past the river sometimes. I told myself it was accidental, just a shortcut. I never got out of the car. I never stopped. I just looked and kept going, heart hammering, half expecting to see him standing there like I'd imagined 100 times, wet, furious, alive. Instead, there was always just water and lights and the reflection of a season that insists on joy whether you deserve it or not. I began to understand that Christmas wasn't mocking me. It was indifferent. And somehow, that felt worse. I always thought guilt would feel like punishment. Like pain. Like something that would force me to atone. That's not how it worked. Guilt adapted. It learned my routines and hid inside them. I started doing good things for the wrong reasons. Donating to charities. Helping coworkers move. Being the guy who stayed late when someone else needed a shift covered. Every decent act felt like I was adding weight to the other side of a scale only I could see. As long as it balanced, I could keep standing. Sometimes I'd imagine telling someone. Not the police, never that. Just someone who knew me well enough to see past the surface. I'd rehearse the confession in my head, always stopping right before the worst part. I wasn't afraid of consequences anymore. I was afraid of being seen clearly. The strangest thing was how selective my fear became. I stopped worrying about getting caught by evidence. That window felt closed. Instead, I worried about Evan's family. About running into them somewhere. About hearing his name spoken with certainty. He's dead, instead of hope. As long as he was missing, there was room for stories that didn't include me as the ending. I learned that you can live with almost anything if it stays unresolved. Closure is for the innocent. For people who can afford it. For the rest of us, ambiguity is the hiding place. There was a night, years later, when I came closer to telling the truth than I ever had. It wasn't dramatic. No police lights. No interrogation room. Just me and my girlfriend, sitting on the couch after too much wine, a movie paused halfway through because neither of us was really watching. She asked me, out of nowhere, if I'd ever done something I couldn't forgive myself for. The question hit harder than anything the police had ever asked. I laughed first. A reflex. Then I didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. She turned toward me, concern softening her face, and for a moment I felt this overwhelming urge to just drop it all in her lap. To let the truth finally be someone else's problem too. I started talking. Carefully. I told her I'd made mistakes. That I'd hurt people by choosing myself when I shouldn't have. That there was something from my past that still followed me. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. She reached for my hand and said, "You're not a bad person, William. Bad people don't feel like this." That was it. That was the moment. The door was open, and instead of walking through, I closed it quietly and locked it from the inside. I nodded. I let her comfort me. I let her be wrong about me. Later that night, lying awake beside her, I realized something ugly and permanent. I wasn't just hiding the truth anymore. I was actively choosing a version of myself that required Evan to stay gone forever. And that choice, I knew, was one I was probably going to keep making. Life kept moving. It always does. Jobs changed. We moved apartments. People drifted in and out of our orbit. Evan's case cooled into a file that only came up on anniversaries or slow news days. Sometimes an article would resurface, still missing after all these years, and I'd read it like a stranger, scanning for new details that might drag me back into the light. Nothing ever did. That should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like being sentenced to an open-ended term with no parole hearing. I learned that getting away with something doesn't mean escaping it. It means carrying it without witnesses. Every major life moment had a shadow, promotions, holidays, quiet mornings that should have been peaceful. I'd think if Evan were here, this version of me wouldn't exist. And then I'd hate how true that was. I stopped going near the river entirely. Took longer routes. Avoided certain bars. Not because I was afraid of being recognized, because I was afraid of recognizing myself. The man who walked away that night didn't feel like a past version of me anymore. He felt current. Ongoing. Sometimes I'd imagine an alternate ending where I made a different call, where consequences came fast and clean, where the story stopped. But real life doesn't offer endings like that. It offers continuations. It lets you live on top of what you did and asks how well you can pretend the foundation isn't cracked. This confession, this slow bleed of words, is the closest thing I have to an ending. And even now, I know it isn't one. I don't know what people expect at the end of a confession like this. A twist. A redemption arc, handcuffs. I don't have any of that. I wasn't caught. I didn't turn myself in. I built a life on top of a moment I can't undo, and that life looks normal enough that no one questions it. But here's the truth I wish I'd understood earlier: not choosing is still a choice, and it's usually the most selfish one available. I told myself I wasn't a killer, and maybe legally that matters. Emotionally, morally, it doesn't. A person disappeared, and my inaction sealed that disappearance. I live with that every day, whether I acknowledge it or not. If you're reading this and you're at the edge of a bad decision, telling yourself you'll just get through the moment and deal with the fallout later, don't. Later is a lie. There's only after, and after is long. It stretches into holidays and quiet evenings and conversations where you almost tell the truth but don't. It changes how you see yourself in reflections. It teaches you how to compartmentalize until you're not sure what's real anymore. I learned that you don't need to be a monster to do monstrous things. You just need fear, timing, and the willingness to put yourself first one too many times. If there's any warning in this, any advice worth taking, it's this: face the consequences while they're still finite. Guilt without resolution doesn't fade, it adapts. I'm William. This is one of my stories. And if nothing else, I hope it proves that getting away with something isn't the same as surviving it.